everybody. Welcome to the International Kriegsspiel Society's Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. Today, we're going to debrief from Grand Auerstedt. And pardon me if I get the name wrong, but that's just something I do as an American who speaks English and has never learned another foreign language. Why did we win those world wars, right? If never mind, whatever. uh, Fox American Exceptionalism. I'm going to put the screen up. We're joined today by Felix and Achilles, who's going to talk to us about some cavalry stuff because we had quite a discussion about cavalry stuff. We have Felix here, who is essentially the lead umpire during the event, and we will probably hear from a number of other persons who were involved in the event. We have a studio audience present, and all of those folks are welcome to raise their hand and pop in here, ask questions, and comment on their experiences. And some of these people I will invite as we go on through the discussion. Please pardon me as I work through OBS and everything. I want to make sure that you folks are able to see everything, that you can hear everything, and if you have any questions on the YouTube or if you have any issues, like if the audio's not coming in clearly or something, let us know and we will take measures to correct that. All right. I'm taking my face off the screen and I want you to be able to look at the whole map here. And so every time I click on it, of course, I'm just going to do Tabletop Simulator for now. All right, there we are. Um, First of all, I want to just start with some quick thank yous. I want to thank Felix in particular for being lead umpire for both Grand Jena and Grand Auerstedt. And I also want to thank everybody who participated and the people who contributed. Sean Lambert, who did the map, and both maps, in fact, as well as Damon, who did the pieces. Felix also created software for the order of battle where we just upload a spreadsheet and it automatically creates the pieces for us. That was an incredible time savings. And Felix also got, I think, the dispatch bot working for us and a couple of other odds and ends. So I want to thank all of the people who did all of the work to make this event happen and to make it such a success. I'm going to start with Felix here. And Felix, I don't know, do we want to walk through the battle first, I think, and then we can go into the feedback?
Yeah, we can definitely try, but I might not know everything that happened in the battle, so we'll have to work with what we got. Would be much better if we had maybe the commanders in chief here, but I don't think any of them could join us. So we'll just have to make do.
All right. So I'm going to just start by explaining to people that this is by no means the historic battle or the historic setup. It was never intended to be such. And that's because I have this thing where I like to do what I call turning the map or turning the scenario 90 degrees. And that is, I don't like doing the historic battle because then players are tempted to parrot what happened in history. So you will pretty much never see me do a historic battle. So why call it Grand Jena or Auerstedt? It's called Grand because it's a showcase, a big showcase game. That's what that means in International Kriegsspiel Society nomenclature. And it's called Jena and Auerstedt because we are fighting on the historic battlefields, and the experience is inspired by and informed by what happened, but it is, again, like most Kriegsspiel Society events, in no way historical. So please understand that if you came here expecting some discussion of the historic battle, it's not likely to happen. That doesn't mean the history doesn't have bearing. It's just that was never the designer's intent. So, given that, what we ended up having was we have the Prussians advancing from actually, the Prussians are defending in the east. North is up on this map. Here is the east, and here are the Prussian formations. Those look pretty French to me, so let's go over here. These are Prussians. And here are the Prussian formations. The north is up. And the Prussians defended along a line here. They have a strong formation here in the south. They then come up here and we have successive lines deployed, which is a generally good idea, good thing to do. The lines that extend over here to the right with Brunswick's formation, I believe, and the Blucher's formation. I think Brunswick then was in the center. Yeah, Brunswick in the center, Blucher in the right. And then, of course, they have a small cavalry formation here on the far right in a small valley on the far side of a ridge, which is here. This ridge kind of divides the northern sector from the central sector. And they had these two small cavalry formations defending in the northern sector. There's nothing in the south. The south, of course, has a steep valley, or a deep valley, I should say. However, it's not very good terrain for the offense. It is excellent terrain for the defense. Nonetheless, everything appears situated to happen on this relatively sloping terrain. It's sort of a wide open, gentle sloping terrain in the center of the battlefield. Obliging the Prussians in that way are the French. The French from north to south have a massive cavalry detachment set up here in the north under Nansouty, played by Miles, the guy who you might know of from Little Wars TV. And then moving to the south, we have an additional cavalry formation, and these two cavalry formations, of course, will dominate this northern valley all the way to the point of the funnel, where then you get sort of a Thermopylae type situation here, where a smaller force can easily block a larger force. And it will do so to some with some degree of success until late in the battle. Here we have an additional French corps. I think this is the 7th Corps, yep. And they are on this ridge, and they will dominate this ridge throughout the entire battle, giving them a commanding position of the battlefield. In the center, where we expected to see most of the action, but we actually ended up seeing much less than we expected, we have the 5th and I believe the 3rd Corps it was. And these corps will attack in the center, but not until very late. The Prussians have a forward deployed cavalry screen that prevented the French from getting good intelligence on the main line of resistance that was deployed by the Prussians, and that was how the battle began. Felix, did you want to, so that everybody here gets a change of voice, did you want to describe how the battle unfolded? Do you remember? If if
Yeah,
not,
mostly,
I
hopefully.
can, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, no, please jump in whenever I forget
Okay.
anything. I think so. What we had in the center was basically two French corps advancing. The one we had on the ridge, as we saw before, they were basically advancing along this road on the top of the ridge through the forest in kind of a long, drawn-out road column. And then we had a second corps of them further to the south, and I don't know which one went in first. I guess was it the third corps, and then the seventh was kind of behind them, right?
Yes.
And they kind of advanced against the center and against this cavalry there. And then in the north, of course, there's the French cavalry, which is advancing along the valley, and they will basically do this. Obviously, the Prussians, they are not able to defend at all against them, being numerically much uh, less, being much less. And I think one of the interesting points here is that the Prussians don't have a player in this valley. So this detachment that they have, there's only one brigade, and the brigades in this game were not commanded by players. So the player that was in command of this cavalry would only get the information of what was going on there with a delay, because of course the messenger from this brigade commander would have to bring it back to them. So I think these were the initial movements. And then I think in the middle of the game is where I'm probably getting a little bit fuzzy of what happened. So I think there was a situation on the ridge where the French were advancing, and I think the Prussians also, and that's one of the points where it's a bit sad that we don't have any of the Prussian commanders here who could speak to that. But I think they basically decided right before the game that they didn't like their deployment, that they wanted to change it, and because we didn't allow them, they had to do that at the start of the game, which is that they moved forward as well. And I'm not exactly sure what their reasoning was, that they didn't want to stand their ground where they were, but they wanted to defend further forward. And on the ridge, and maybe you can speak to the situation, Marshall. I think there was some thing where the French basically kind of ran into some Prussian troops there on the ridge and were surprised by them or something like that.
Right. Yeah. The Prussians ended up defending to their right flank, and they established increasingly strong defenses here on the right. When the French column first appeared at the top of this ridge, the Prussians had an opportunity to make a strong, spoiling attack against the head of that column, which I think would have sent the column reeling and prevented the French from taking the ridge. However, rather than make that attack, the Prussians continued to draw a defensive line against the forming French attack and building up their strength. They never had the confidence to actually push forward and make a concentrated attack at the head of that column. Eventually, the French were able to come in entirely and occupy this whole position up here, the high ground, and fire down on the on the Prussians. And the Prussians then, of course, lost their opportunity to prevent the French from doing this. What we ended up seeing was the Prussian line would get bent like a horseshoe or a fish hook into sort of this disposition, with the French making strong attacks in the south in particular, which I think was the best move made by the French all game. And attacks, of course, with cavalry from the north. The Prussians would redeploy their cavalry reserve here to counter this. By the end of the battle, and I'll go ahead and load the in game state shortly, you'll see that the French have finally made their way along this front. They're engaging along the front here, and they are fighting in the north and the south. My biggest critique of the whole thing is that the French should have had a much easier time winning this battle, but instead they diluted their forces, something that they did at Grand Jena as well. And while the French were declared the victors, I personally feel that the Prussians did an outstanding job holding off the French. So, from a Kriegsspiel perspective, I would consider the Prussians the winner, in my opinion, even though the French would probably hold the battlefield by the end of the day. In fact, they most certainly would hold the battlefield at the end of the day. But the Prussian army, of course, would escape intact. You see here the in state. And Felix, I don't know if you want to go over this or if you want me to go ahead. It's up to you.
Yeah, I can
Hmm.
start. So we have here in the south this end situation where the Prussians have basically retreated to a new defensive line that they tried to set up. So they were further forward uh, a few turns before this. And I think this was an interesting point in the game that they did this, because I think we see this relatively rarely, that players make the decision to retreat, and I really like that they did that, because they felt, and I think they were right there, that they were getting overwhelmed and they were not getting reinforcements because all the other Prussian troops were engaged in as well. They had lost most of their cavalry, so they were worried that their flank might be threatened, and so they decided to retreat. I think that was a good decision there. And the French basically have moved through this smaller valley here on the side in the south, and moved onto this Prussian position and actually hit the flank. And I think this was something that Achilles also mentioned, that uh, I don't know if it was him, but someone said this, that attacking the flank doesn't necessarily mean to go around the enemy and then come 90 degrees from the side, but it can also mean that you hit the outward most part of their line, where they might be weak and unanchored. So that's basically what's going on here. And I think this was
Yeah, that was
um,
me.
yeah, it was you. Okay, good. Yeah, take credit where credit is due.
Thank you.
Uh, I think that although I just said that, that I just said I thought it was a good decision to retreat here. It also one of the things that then, of course, made us umpires think, okay, the line is breaking, they are retreating. Probably we can start to call the game now, or that's something that would make us think about calling the game.
Mhm.
All right. So in the center here, we see that the French made a very late attack, and the Prussians are actually, I don't remember if this is a counterattack on the Prussian behalf or if the French managed to drive this far in. But take a look at the Prussian cavalry here, which is flanked around. So that is
Yeah,
not a
so this is
situation the French want to be in.
this is a counterattack, so to say. So by at the same time that the French managed to pressure the flank, they also spread out their line, right? So and now they have this problem that they have not enough forces in the center, and that they have created this kind of hole in their line here between the center and the north. And this is, of course, one of the things that we always struggle with at the IKS, that players like to create the longest line. And here's one of the outcomes of that, why this is not necessarily always the best idea, because now they have basically the situation that they have this hole in their line and they don't have a reserve or anything to counteract that.
All right, here in the north, we have the Prussian formations. They did in fact attack, looking at this, but again, they've attacked the French where the French are strong in this case. And I don't know that they're going to break through. I don't think they have the depth of reserves to break through. The French still command the ridge itself, and I don't even know if the French were pushed back at all. I think maybe they were pushed back a little on their line, but that only hardened their defenses. And the French seem to have the better position here, in my opinion, just looking at it.
Yeah, the French were pushed back, and in fact, I think the corps commander here was at the end of the game quite, I don't want to say desperate, but thought that his position was being overrun, and he lost several batteries to the Prussian cavalry here sweeping in. And so he was very unhappy about his position, and this was also partially because he couldn't see some of his troops because they are there in the forest, and so they didn't show up on his screenshot. And so he wasn't aware, sorry, of how many of his troops were still in reserve or had rallied again and were ready to fight again. So, and I don't know if we want to talk about this forest situation here a bit more, but at least it had that outcome that the corps commander wasn't in full control of his troops anymore because they were in the forest. But I
And
agree with you, Marshall, that probably they still have enough to, and that the Prussian attack has run out of steam here, and that they will push them back.
right. And then here in the cavalry attack, we have cavalry forces, a tremendous number right here. Here's roughly the line with the Prussians being pocketed by French cavalry. I can't remember though if this was a lot, mainly light cavalry on behalf of the French. The French made a decision
It
in the
was
camp. Yeah,
two dragoon two dragoon divisions originally, and I think they had a light. Uh, they added one of the light forces from one of the infantry corps as well.
right. So the let's see here. I'm just trying to get a sense of what we're up against. I don't see any cuirassiers, not really heavy
No,
cavalry, but we have no, we don't even have carbiners there. We have Prussian
no.
carbiners, but they're not. I don't think they're the same as French. So we have some heavier Prussian cavalry here. A lot of light French cavalry, just incredible numbers of light cavalry. But we don't have, battle cavalry so much as we have campaign cavalry on the French side. And I think the French, just by their weight of numbers, are starting to have uh, the weight of numbers, or they're starting to impact the battle from in their favor. But look at all this material they have stacked up back here that is not being productively used. You know, there's a Prussian unit here. I think maybe that had been captured or something. I don't know. Um, but it looks like the French. I don't know what motivated the French to move through a valley to a narrow funnel and stop there. Personally, I would have rather seen them turn in on one of these side roads previously. It looks like they have a force screening here. It looks like the Prussians are coming in here, and they could actually be entrapping the French if that's happening. Um, I don't know if these guys are actually on the march. That looks to me, just from the position of the line, that they're deployed this way, facing this
No,
way.
no, they're moving through the forest. I
Oh,
think that was
okay,
just the umpires being tired and not switching the state of the
okay.
pieces anymore. But yeah, so I think the units that you were showing earlier that screening at the forest and further up, further back, those so left on your screen now, they tried to go through the forest, basically on the road that the Prussians are now on, or similar road, and then they were, when they emerged from the forest, they were beaten back and basically routed back and are now reforming there. And so the Prussians are now trying to do the same. I think the dragoons of the French at this point, I wouldn't call them light cavalry, but yeah, but I think they, even if they get taken, if they are cut off in the back, I think they have now enough moved around that they will basically open up the uh, um, the other side of the funnel, basically.
Mhm. All right. So, given that, I think that would allow the French or the Prussians to escape the situation, even though there may be some French cavalry running around in the rear. I think the Prussians have sufficient cavalry to screen their retreat back here. I don't think it would be an easy retreat for the Prussians to pull off. They've only got two avenues of retreat, which are this road here, which is under direct threat, and this road here, which, if they manage to secure it and screen it from the south and the French don't get aggressive, they could hold that road for a little while, but they would have to pull back and extract. And I think the Prussians would get away with maybe half of the force they have here, maybe more. It depends on how enthusiastic the French would be in counterattack, or in attacking them. But I just felt that the French overall were a little slow to develop their attack. The Prussians had one or two missed opportunities, but I think the big decisions that decided the battle were made before the battle was even met. And that was in the campaign phase of the game. And that was something where just the two side commanders decided what the split of forces were going to be and where those forces were going to go. And in the French case, they placed most or all of their power at the Battle of Jena, where it did prove very effective and, in fact, decisive. And then they sent a minimal quantity and quality of force in the north. And even here, while they had the advantage, I think by spreading their forces out rather than attacking up that central valley or pushing really hard along that ridge, because the Prussians let them have that ridge, I think the French made it harder for themselves than it needed to be. So that's my take on the situation. What's your opinion on that, please, Felix?
Well, I think one thing that KB actually pointed out to me was that he thought that it was very strange that the French had deployed um, all of their cavalry into this
Yeah,
valley
yeah,
in
in
the
the north.
north,
Yeah.
and that will probably go into the question of how to properly use cavalry. In that they had very little, or basically they had no cavalry to exploit any breakthrough in their main behind their main battle line. They basically had no cavalry reserve. They had stripped the corps cavalry from 7th Corps to send them north as well, which then made it so that the 7th Corps was facing Prussian cavalry and so had to develop their position much slower because they were under threat of cavalry attack the whole time. So that is, from the deployment, a very interesting decision. And then they also fully committed to this valley where in the end they couldn't develop their strength. So yeah, I think that is maybe one of the curious points. And maybe we can, there is Sheephead with us. He asked to talk and he said he might give us some insight on what the redeployment of the Prussians was. So maybe, Marshall, you can
Sure.
ask him to.
And this goes for everybody. You're all invited to speak. If you want to speak, just raise your hand. And then, Sheephead, I keep trying to approve you. I don't know why it won't work. Invite to speak,
It doesn't like you.
right? Well, what's new? Let's see here.
While he's doing that, on that point that Felix just brought up about the cavalry and the deployment, I think it's an interesting thing because
There.
it's almost as if they thought of their cavalry as like an armored force or something, and they concentrated it for a single strike. But then they concentrated it on a part of the battlefield where its numbers would be mooted by the
Mhm.
fact that they have to go through a narrow valley. I mean,
Right.
if you're going to do that and use them that way, then you need a location where they can actually, use the numbers that they have. And certainly, by doing that mass like that, uh, it's almost what's the Napoleonic battle where Murat leads the large mass cavalry charge? Is that
Is that
Eylau or
Borodino or
Friedland?
I don't remember.
It was
I don't
one of
remember.
it was either Eylau or Friedland or something. Anyway,
Mhm.
uh, it's they're not taking advantage of what it is, and the dragoons are good battlefield cavalry, and they don't by taking away the light cavalry from the south, the they're not using the corps is not using its cavalry forces to find the enemy, push back the enemy's cavalry screen, find the enemy's lines, um, you know, look for the weak spot, and do
Yeah.
that before you come in with the infantry. They're not doing that part of it. In fact, like I said, they've concentrated so much cavalry force in that strike up north, but the terrain prevents it from being as effective as it should be. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Sheephead, go ahead. Well, he's here. He's got permission to speak. Maybe he's having an audio issue. All right, Sheephead, just go ahead and interrupt us when you get it sorted and you're good to go, and we'll give you the floor. All right, we have somebody else who wants to speak here. So let's see here. Why can't I invite people to speak? Why doesn't that work? There we are. All right.
Hello.
Hello.
So I happen to have been there for the Prussian planning meeting just before the battle, and kind of the reason we wanted to push our line a bit forward is if you see where we currently have like the left flank deployed, you see this little like those two towns, pretty
Right.
much where your screen is already.
Popple and Togwitz, or
Yes.
okay,
And
right.
we were basically planning on using those towns to anchor our center. The initial plan for the Prussians was to turn this into a grindfest in the middle, having the French kind of forcing the French into kind of pushing us slowly back which is why we tried to find as strong as a defensive position as we could, which is which is kind of why we chose that position with the two towns that we could use to anchor our center. You also had Rehehausen in the south there, where currently the French are, which would have been used to anchor our left. That was kind of the plan. Because we were actually thinking that the little, basically where the French put all their cavalry, we were thinking that they were going to ignore it just because of the terrain. Going into the game, we were mostly expecting to fight either a equal or maybe even inferior French cavalry force. And we were also expecting to have secure flanks. We did not think the French would try to flank us, given how bad the terrain was on both sides.
Right, yeah, and again, this valley down here. But had he even sent just a small scouting force through there, it would have met absolutely no opposition. And then, of course, he could have, allowed the rest of the formation to know, whoever these guys are, for example, that, hey, the door is wide open around the south. Or more likely, he could have just rode south with a large cavalry formation. Like if we took just half of these guys that are back here, just a bunch of these guys here, and rode them around south, they would have been in your back, and then they would have cut off your retreat, and then it would have definitely been a decisive French victory once the French got serious about applying their pressure and breaking up your lines, because the French
Oh
did
yeah,
have the weight of numbers, But you were right; the gamble paid off. The French sent nothing to the south because they had nothing to send. And so that was, one of those unforced errors I think that the French made. And I can't explain it other than they chose to invest everything in the north. And well, and then what they sent in the north they did not use to maximum possible effect. This isn't to say they didn't do their best. Nobody, well, most of us here are not professionals. As I remarked at the end in my closing remarks of Grand Auerstedt, at the end of the event, I explained to people that we're not professionals. We're kind of struggling through this game. We're here to have fun and so on, and that does affect some of the decisions that are made, but nonetheless, I think it would have been a more interesting scenario had we seen different choices made by the French in particular.
Yes, if the French had had more cavalry on our left flank, we would have been in a very rough spot. I was actually one of the not the corps commander, but one of the division commanders on the Prussian left.
Right.
So I did actually have the Prussian cavalry was under my command, and I had a small force in the valley to the south. It was on Hill 215. It served as well as scouts, and it was also the formation that was able to recharge the French column on the road, because they just kind of went unnoticed. It's much further west, the Hill 215. It was to the west of the little town, I forget its name.
All right.
Basically west of Auerstedt itself.
Oh, way out here.
Yeah, it was on. If you find it somewhere, Hill 215. Somewhere in
here,
this area.
right here. Here they are.
Yep. I had them sat
Yeah.
there most of the game until they went in for a rear charge on the French force flanking us. Unfortunately, they were beaten back and routed.
Yeah. Were
Their
they
mission would have. Go on.
were they in a position to get you a dispatch in
Yes,
time?
I had
Because
command of them the entire time, and I also got the intel from them that the French were moving into the valley. But unfortunately, I misunderstood what they were saying, so I didn't quite understand what was actually happening. So that was a failure of intel on my part.
okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
I do want to compliment the Prussian use of cavalry, using them as a fast reaction force, as scouts, and to kind of provide the army with superior awareness. Um, you know, uh, I just think from a Kriegsspiel perspective, the Prussians made a lot better choices consistently than the French did. And again, the outcome of the battle was not the Prussian responsibility here in a way, in that I think the outcome was kind of preordained, as it is with most battles. With most battles, It's all the decisions made up to the morning of battle that determine what side is going to win. It's just nobody really knows, so everybody steps up and rolls the dice on the day of battle. But the outcome, if you look at every single battle, was decided beforehand, you know. And well, there we have it. Sheephead, are you able to speak now? I do see that your microphone is muted. We're still not hearing you. I think you unmuted, but your micro, but there's an audio issue.
And
You're,
just to chime in on what you just said, yeah, I think this battle, the outcome of this battle was determined in the pre-battle campaign,
right.
uh, and the decisions that were made based on that. And yeah, I think that basically decided this fight, before it even happened in that sense. And
Right.
and I agree. I mostly agree with your assessment. I think that the as a battle, I think the French uh, the French win this. I
Hmm.
mean, I think inevitably, had we played it out for the whole course of an entire actual day, yeah, the French are going to win. Just their weight of numbers and the position that the Prussians find themselves in was going to defeat them. Um, as a Kriegspiel, on the Kriegspiel side, I think the Prussians outplayed the French.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but on the lower level, on the basically the second level of command, and not. I mean, I think it's interesting though that in both cases you see these three separate battles form,
Hmm.
and you can look at this final state and just see the huge gaps between between the forces. The cavalry fight up there, the infantry fight on that ridge, the fight in the center. You know, uh, you've got these huge gaps between them, and you know there was nobody trying to maintain contact with the people on their left and their right. You know,
Hmm.
uh, the line wasn't the forces weren't trying to maintain contact, and certainly part of that on the Prussian side, that's understandable because they just don't have enough force to spread out that far. I
Hmm.
mean, they're already thin by spreading out, and the French kind of devolved into that and kind of separated themselves from each other, and didn't seem to concern themselves with, hey, like, especially if you look in the center there, they didn't seem to concern themselves with, hey, where where is our forces on our left? What's between us and them? Because that was just empty space. And you can see the Prussians took huge advantage of it. I mean,
Right.
threw all that cavalry in there. And I mean, on any other day, that could have been decisive. I mean, that could
Right.
have destroyed the French, uh, in this battle. Um, so it's interesting not being able to see, or at least in contact with the people, in some kind of proximity, so that you can support each other, is an important aspect to keep in mind as a commander on the field. And that's at every level. That's from the lowest level all the way up. Knowing where the people on your left and your right are, and not allowing that kind of space to develop, because that can be very dangerous.
Right. Right. All right. So I think it was an exciting battle to say the least. I found it deeply fascinating to see. And one of the things that probably bears a whole nother podcast or discussion is, again, this goes back to comments I made in the last 5 minutes of the live stream on this particular battle that's already on YouTube. You guys can listen to that, where we're a bunch of guys sitting around on a Saturday. We want to play. We're putting 6, 7 hours into this ordeal. We want to play. And that also changes the decision making calculus that players make. One of the things that you did so well, Achilles, because you were the French cavalry commander at Jena, is you waited patiently in reserve for your time to strike. I think you sat there for 5 or 6 hours before you did
Yes, pretty
anything.
much.
But then when your time came, the battle was developed and it was right for you to drop the hammer on the French center, which you did, and you were successful, of course, in breaking the Prussian center. I said French center a second ago. I meant Prussian center,
Mm.
and you dropped the hammer with spectacular results, making you basically the big hero of the day. Um, but
Yay.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna, yeah. Although in my mind, although that was, as I told you uh, personally, that was the best moment I've ever had in a Kriegspiel was that screenshot that showed me the opportunity that I was presented with. That was the best moment in a Kriegsspiel I've ever had. It was just perfect. But in my mind, through that entire battle, the real hero was somebody who was much more unsung in all of the post commentary, and that was Lasalle up in the north, because he could have lost us the battle if he had been less capable.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
he ran into a situation that we had not anticipated, and he recognized that, hey, this isn't what we were thinking was going to be. Let me find out what's really happening and then
Mhm,
respond to it. And he turned it into a he turned that fight up in the north into a stalemate, and that allowed us to win the battle in the other in a different location.
mhm,
If he had not done so, if he had been foolish or made him, continued to make an error in that area and had gotten himself wrecked, then that battle turns out completely differently. The Prussians collapse us from the north.
mhm,
So so in my mind, even though, I mean, he didn't win a glorious fight, you know,
mhm.
like I did.
But he
but
helped.
but uh, but what he did was more important in that respect, and I think it allowed the other thing to develop the way it did, and that's one of those things that you don't see you don't see that in the box score afterwards,
Right,
but
right.
it's what actually allowed you to win the game, you
Yeah.
know.
And if anybody is listening and you're confused about what Achilles just said there for the past couple minutes, we were discussing Grand Jena, which was the other
Hmm.
half of this battle that was fought in on January 25th of 2025. That is also on the YouTube, and I do suggest people go review that to see what happened there with LaSalle in the north and Murat there in the center. Because again, yes, it was glorious. All right, Felix, did we want to talk about your survey yet, or did you have any further commentary on the battle itself?
No, I think one thing I might be want to reiterate, and which also becomes now clearer to me talking about this, is that the French started with a very concentrated position, except for the cavalry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so they had a whole corps in reserve, basically. But somehow they are still now in this position where they are very spread out, where they have holes in their line, and where basically, yeah, they have cavalry in their rear. And so that is really interesting to me because it shows this allure of flanking, of going to the sides, of not keeping reserves, of making the biggest line, and it happened again, although they started so well.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's well put. I mean, you're right. They started out really concentrated, but then they just kept dispersing themselves, going further and further out. You know,
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
yeah. All right, let's take a look then at your survey. Felix, you did a survey, and let me go ahead and there we go. Well, I kind of there we are. And I now have on my screen, and I don't know if people can see that. Let me see if they see it on the. I don't think they see that on the Discord. I'm gonna have to reshare the screen. Change windows or something. Does that work? I don't know if that works.
It's on YouTube.
It's on the YouTube, yeah. I want people to see it here. There we are. Okay, and so now this here discusses the turn length of the event. Personally, I thought the turns were a little slow. I think they were what, 15, 20 minutes or what? What were they?
That was if we were lucky, I think. So I think on Jena we might have been at 50-20. I think at Auerstedt it was more like 20 to 30 at some points.
Uh-huh. Well,
Um,
there are
but I mean,
there's a couple points in every game where you're gonna get a very long drawn out turn where it is gonna be 20 to 30. And I've learned that I don't think it matters what system you use. It's that point where the two sides finally come into contact and they begin to clash and they begin to send a flurry of dispatches out to all of their superiors and peers to say, hey, we found the enemy and we're going into battle. So there's always that turn where that happens. And at that point, the game just slows down because there's so much work for the umpires to process. And those one or two turns where that seems to happen. When armies are just marching, I think turns can be very quick. And when everybody is engaged and you don't have a lot of maneuver, I think that's pretty quick. But you're always going to have that turn in the early middle part of the game where they first clash, and that's going to be a long turn. But anyway, that's also a standard size game where you have a lot of umpires. This was not any of that. So
yeah, and it seems that at least the people who answered the survey, and please note that there were only 10 people of the I don't know how many players did we have overall, probably like something close to 50. But it seems that people didn't think it was so bad.
right,
Most people, at least.
right, okay. All right. So overall, the game length was, now the game I think lasted 6 hours, 5 to 6 hours. I think 6 hours. I think it was 6 hours. So
Uh,
go
yeah,
ahead.
something like
Yeah.
that.
All right. So I guess people were pretty
Well,
happy
it
with it.
seems that people were mostly happy.
They wanted, so there are people who wanted one or two more turns, it looks like. There's always going to be those folks. But yeah, I
There's
mean, yeah,
always that guy.
there's always that guy. But that's okay. That's understandable because one of the problems that we run into with running any Kriegsspiel is if you are playing a game and it's 5 or 6 hours and you are being patient, you are waiting to set up your big attack. And then finally, you're ready for your big attack to go in. I can't think of anything worse than spending 5 hours in maneuver and preparation to get everything just right. And you're ready to order the big attack, or you order the big attack, and then, of course, the umpire calls the game, which they could do. They could say, well, you ordered the big attack. That big attack is going to succeed because it's so well prepared. And we know that the enemy has no means of stopping you. Why roll the dice and play it out? I would think a good argument for that is you deserve to see what you worked so hard on. You want to see the cake come out of the oven and actually taste it, right? And oh wow, this is good
Mhm.
cake I made. You know, but at the end of the day, we also have humans, including humans in Europe, who started the game at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's now 10 o'clock at night. They've got to go to bed and you know do we add another 30 to 45 minutes to the game just so that you can eat your cake? And well, it's a tough call sometimes.
Personally, I blame Felix. He- I was that
That is
guy.
exactly right, actually.
Yeah, I was that guy at Jena because I waited all day for that moment, and then we hit. I wanted one more turn, just one more turn, because I just wanted to see the the aftermath of it. So I wanted that one more screenshot, and then they called the game, and I was like, oh damn, you know. So yeah, I was that guy at Jena, so I understand that feeling, and I blame Felix.
No, and as I said, you're right to blame me, because I think it was in both cases mostly me who said, "Okay, guys, we have to stop now. I'm running out of steam after 6 hours." But it's also this the thing that always happens, right? That in a live game you never manage to cover as much of the battle as you want to. You want to cover much more in the beginning, because then you would have like the maneuver and the scouting and everything, and you want to cover much more in the end, because then it actually the decisive things have happened, and you can actually see what are the results, and you might even like play out the pursuit where most of the casualties might happen, and so on. So but as long as we are running at this speed where we don't manage to even be 1-to-1 to playtime, then we will only ever cover a certain part of the battle and not manage to get everything in there that we want to.
Yeah. And I think it's always been said that, we don't play these games to the final, termination, because, what's the point? At some point it just becomes murder.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
that's what happens at, when you reach
In real
that
life.
certain point,
Yeah.
that tipping point in the battle where one side is done,
Mm.
and then it just devolves into murder. uh and there's an old saying, of course, that the object of good tactics is to commit murder. So the the idea is to get to that point. That's what you're trying to get to. But I mean, that's not what Kriegsspiel is about. It's once you reach that tipping point, and it's pretty clear, um, that you've reached it, or you've reached the point where the umpires can judge that the tipping point isn't going to happen,
Mhm.
that this is just going to be a stalemate. This is going to be a draw. Uh, then yeah, you call it, because there's no point in going on through the mass annihilation that happens afterwards, or the continued draw to the end of the day. There's no point in continuing that.
We're just here to aid and abet murder, not to actually pull the trigger.
Yeah, besides the real, all the decision points have essentially been reached by that point. you
Yep,
know
yep.
uh Now it's just execution, and it's execution in two different forms,
Right, right.
basically. so
All right.
so, yeah, yeah, so you end it there.
The combat results were a few said believable, five said mostly believable, or no, one said probably less than believable, and one said implausible. Um, any insight into that, Felix? What were your
So
opinion of the combat results? What were your feelings on this?
I think so. The 2 points below here are from the players that put them in the survey, and I assume that those are the people who were not happy with the result.
Mm,
Um, and so the one person said that I think they were a little bit unhappy, and said that the cavalry resolution was just bad.
mm-hmm,
And I understand, people can get frustrated, and it's fair to tell us and to vent a little, but it's not really something that we can do anything about, right? If you just
mm-hmm.
say bad, then okay, well, a cavalry is always difficult because they move so fast,
Yeah.
and it's hard to portray them realistically, I think, and they can have such a incredible decisive outcome, but on the other hand, they are also easily spent, and sometimes they don't do anything, and so on. So they are always hard to portray, and I think that is something that we will always struggle with. I don't think that it was especially bad in this game. And then the other point that was mentioned was that and I assume this refers to Auerstedt, that the French seem to have no penalty for deploying in the forest, and I think that's fair. When that was happening, I was like, oh no, what are they doing? How are we going to resolve this? And then I think we just went with it and didn't do much about it, because if you realize something like that in the middle of a a game, then it's very hard to make the right decisions there. I don't know if you had any. I think the person who said this in the survey said that you mentioned this in the cast as well, Marshall. I don't know.
Hmm. Okay. Uh, like I was agreeing with them, or that I
Yeah,
reinforced
that
their
that you
opinion?
were
Yeah,
also
maybe so. Yeah,
wondering about the people in the forest not having more problems.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. As the author of the rule set, I can speak to both of these a little bit. One of the things that this is the rule set's called SoCal Advanced, and I'm not going to be publishing it for Napoleonics specifically because I think there are some shortcomings. I do believe that there were issues with the umpires not applying all of the mechanics of the system. For example, when units moved and did things, I don't think they were reducing effectiveness points like at all. Now, I'm okay with not reducing effectiveness points if they're just marching in the middle of nowhere, no enemy contact is expected. They're going to have a period to rest. There's no sense of doing unnecessary work. I understand that. But once you're in proximity to the enemy and combat is likely, you do need to apply that particular mechanic because it reduces the combat effectiveness of the unit, which is what would happen because as the unit is operating in the woods or moving around, they're going to lose cohesion. And I think there has to be a discernible effect of that. You know, it has to be measured, it has to factor in. And so, if that wasn't being factored in, then yes, you are going to get increasingly implausible combat results. You're going to have a case where a unit comes out of the woods and somehow they're magically perfectly capable when we all know, because anybody who's been to a forest knows there's just undergrowth everywhere and stuff. This isn't a time where they swept the woods, you know? So uh, it, I can't imagine operating at all in a wooded area, and coming out of that with, maximum combat effectiveness. It's ridiculous. As for cavalry combat, and this is the biggest reason why I'm not going to publish the system, is the permutations, meaning all the different possible types and combinations of cavalry and the wide array of tactics that could be employed were so tremendous. You literally need a whole separate book for it. I mean, I'm up here waving around my Nosworthy here, Battle Tactics of Napoleon. You need a whole book just for the cavalry tactics. And I can't cover that in a rule set that is meant to be quick and concise and play out in a 5 to 6 hour game where we want to get through at least 12 to 18 turns so we get to a satisfying resolution. It's simply not possible. So I really sympathize with whoever had the issue with the cavalry, and I think I would agree with them. They probably have a legitimate gripe, and that's why I'm not going to publish the rule set. The rule set failed in that regard. My instructions to the umpires were brief yourself on cavalry tactics. I provided some sources and a primer on cavalry tactics, but at the end of the day, it was just going to be up to the umpires to run all that calculus in their head and determine whether or not an attack was well formed or not. Then they make the morale test, and if they pass the morale test, then the attack lands with all of the benefits of the attack. But that was that. And so, yeah, I don't blame folks here. Otherwise, it looks like the system worked pretty well for most people, for 80%. So, okay. All right. For your enjoyment of the game, nice assets like the map and pieces are, and half the players said important, the other half said less than important. But I think there was only one person who said irrelevant. So,
There's
Nick,
always that one guy.
right? There's always that. You can't please them all. Let me say
You
this:
know, you could
if
do a poll on puppies and you'll never get 100%. I mean,
what,
there's always going to be that 1% that don't like puppies or something.
right? If you don't have haters, if you don't have
Hmm.
enemies, if you don't have people who don't gripe or complain about what you're doing, then you're probably not doing anything. I
And you're
learned
not
this,
doing anything.
yeah,
Exactly.
a long time ago. You're going to pick up haters and enemies and people who disagree and people who gripe and complain every step of the way. You just got to brush that off and keep going. If your numbers are, in the main pretty good, That's good enough, and you're doing just about as well as you can. You could deliver the perfect game, and there will still be that one guy who busts in like Diogenes and points out some flaw. And you're like, well, they're right, but we're going to go with it anyway. So,
It's got to be kind of utilitarian. The
yeah,
best result for the most people, you know.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could all be Kant, categorical imperative type folks, but it just doesn't work in the real world, which is messy. So there we have it.
I
Mhm.
think
Uh,
I think in this case, it might. I mean, it's not even someone complaining, right? They're just saying this is not important to me, which is
yeah.
Mm.
fair,
Well,
and I
they're
think which is
wrong,
also why
Felix.
we
They're wrong.
You're just
why we
wrong.
why we asked this question, because we were wondering if um, for the umpires the pieces, and I don't want to make Damon unhappy, which are awesome. They are absolutely fantastic, and I'm already looking into how I can use them in my own games. But they add, compared to just having blocks, they add umpire workload, which of course translates to nicer visuals, right? You can see the
Mhm.
formations which you couldn't see in a block. And so our question here was basically, is it worth it? And it seems that most people think that this is important for them, for their enjoyment of the game, to have nice visuals. And so I guess the answer here is yes, it's worth it if we can manage it.
It's
Yeah,
interesting as a player. As a player, I never use the blocks. I don't use them at all. In fact, uh, I just draw on my map. I never use them because, and that's primarily because I'm too inept to actually try to keep all my blocks in the right place and do what I'm supposed to do with them. So just as a player, it's easier for me to just draw where my units are and everything.
fair enough.
But some people, yeah, they're much more visual than that, and the blocks are a big benefit for it. So
All right. Let's see here. Other negative feedback. All right, that was good. Um, let's see here. Positive feedback. No, let's go to the negative feedback. All right. Let me work through this. Unhappy that the deployment and setup was not historical. And I've explained I think I explained at the beginning of the podcast why I just don't do historical. If it's a martial game, don't expect historical. In fact, on the contrary, expect aliens on turn 3 to drop out of the sky, because that's just what I do. Everything's got a twist, everything's different, nothing is straightforward or historical. And the reasons for that, again, I don't want players to parrot history. I want you to create your own problems, and I want you to solve your own problems. And to me, I find that far more fascinating and engaging than historical. There are probably umpires out there who can and will do historical deployments in games, and I think that's awesome. And go get in those games. One of the purposes of the entire International Kriegsspiel Society was to fill the world wargaming space with Kriegsspiel, partly just so I could go and play, but also because the way that I think and the way that I do things is different from how you might think and do things. I do not own Kriegsspiel. I do not have a monopoly on Kriegsspiel. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that we have better wargaming out there in the world that's played Kriegsspiel style, and that I get to come up to a table at some point and play. That's what I want. And I tell people, go establish your own server and run games the way that you want to run them. You don't have to run them anything like the way I've run mine, because I guarantee you I'm probably wrong about half or majority of everything that I do anyway. So go do it better. I encourage that. And so, yeah, run some historical games and see how you feel about it. And if you love it, continue. If not, change. It's that simple. But yeah, my stuff is probably never going to be historical. Difficult to understand the situation because casualties and unit status were not visually indicated. All right, so Mr. Felix, this is another thing I saw the umpires not doing. because the way we configured the pieces was there was a way to apply visual casualties to the pieces, and the units would shrink down in size and get smaller. I did a round with Damon about this, and Damon ended up creating that functionality, and we got that built in there. And again, this has to do with the big workload that the umpires were under. So I'm not really upset about it, but again, just like not reducing the effectiveness points, the system and the pieces could not shine as brightly as they could have because some of the features of the system and the pieces were not utilized. But I get it though. This was really a big game, and I don't really blame the umpires. Communication planning phase and pregame was not good. You're right, it wasn't good. It was amazing. Um,
Mm.
one of the problems was that people wanted to see like this whole campaign that was run down to the division level leading up to the battle, and it was realized back in December when we finally got the map squared away that we did not have, because we only had about 2 to 3 weeks maximum, really 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to run a campaign, and we just didn't have time. I did post, in my defense, I did post, and probably more than once. I posted more than once in the server. I have a mind to pull up the announcements and see if I can find my posts. Um, I made very clear that only the side commanders were going to run the campaign, and that was simply because we didn't have time to go down and run a whole campaign, which would have taken at least 1 to 2 months minimum to run. So I apologize to everybody that they may have joined expecting to play a campaign at least at the core level or maybe down to the division level, but at least at the core level, and you didn't get that. All you got was the two side commanders on each side making key decisions and basically determine who was going to go to which battlefield and how did they get there. And that's what happened. So I apologize that if I was unclear in that, although in my defense, I believe I posted that. So would have liked.
I think
Go
the
ahead.
I think the sorry, Marshall.
It's okay.
I think the cavalry, the movement to contact portion, that pre-game campaign with the cavalry stuff, that it was fantastic to have that in there. Um, yes, it can be improved. Of course, anything
Hmm.
can be improved, but it was fantastic to have it in there, and it did have
Hmm.
actual impact
Hmm.
on the two battles,
Right.
because
Yeah,
it
I
helped
did. I
determine. Yeah.
People don't know this, and I didn't admit to it, but yes, I did run the cavalry side of things a little bit. Because that was where the two armies were coming into contact. So I didn't see a
Hmm.
way around doing that. But yeah.
And it had a real world impact because it helped it informed on my side, Napoleon Miles, um, enough to make a decision, you know, on how he wanted to split the army. And so it determined what kind of OOB we would have at Jena and at Auerstedt. And I think, going down that path, as I say, it can be improved. Of course, anything can be improved, but I think that's a great path to be going down. I think it really makes things interesting, and the better we make that, the more interesting it will be. Um, so I applaud the author on that one for sure, because it's something that I've longed to see in one of these, and it was, it was a it's a great idea.
Hmm.
So kudos to whoever came up with that concept. I think is a genius.
Thank you.
I think like I get the criticism here a little bit, and I don't think there is any need to be defensive, right? Things can always be improved, and we do this survey to get also negative feedback. And I mean, as
Hmm.
specifically, I added the question like, what was your least favorite thing? Because I wanted negative feedback, right? Because that
Hmm.
helps us to improve. And it's always nice if it's constructive, but also if it's not constructive, it can still tell us something. Not saying that this is not constructive. So I think that it's a good idea to have this pre-game campaign, but also it has the weakness that we already had predetermined the battlefields,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So it kind of only could end one way, and then I think if we wanted to do this pre-campaign, then we should have put a little bit more um, emphasis on that, because this way we would always end up on these battlefields, and yes, the OOB was determined by it, but on the other hand, I know that for example the Prussians tried to like set up their defenses in Stadt Sulza and basically just like set up a defensive position there, which then in the end they couldn't really do because that wouldn't have ended them up on the historical or the pre-chosen tactical battlefield. So there is something to think about how this can be done next time, maybe.
Hmm. So
Oh
you're
yeah, I
saying
think that would be a great improvement when we can do it that when
oh
we can
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
It's just gonna it'll just make it that much better. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem that we ran into was if we were to allow some sort of free flowing, free form campaign, it would have taken at least 2 months play by post, and then the battlefields that we would have ended up on would have been different from the historic. At that point, don't even call it Jena Auerstedt because you're not going to fight there. And then the next thing is we have to get poor Sean to create two, three, four, however many maps now we need to play out the grand battle, which is also ridiculous and impractical. I mean, the poor guy made two whole maps for us by hand, which I believe was an incredible quantity of work, probably. And so, just from a practical perspective, we could not do it, even though we had, I think, 5 to 6 months time to plan and execute the battle. It just didn't work out that way. So. Yeah. Felix, though, the guy who asked for negative feedback, just so you guys understand this about Felix, he's also the person who will jump into a cold pond or lake on January 1st and go swimming in that, probably. So, yeah, I
Because
won't,
there's clearly something wrong with him.
right? With me, if the water's not, a nice, 95 or better degrees, I'm not getting in it. But I'm joking, Felix. I'm joking.
95? That's boiling. What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I forget you're in Germany, so you use those communist degrees. In America, we use freedom degrees. So,
Had to set you up for that one.
tell me this, Felix. Do you go swimming in cold water for like the health benefits or anything, or just for fun?
No.
Okay, me
Well,
neither.
I mean, if I go swimming, it's in cold water, living in Germany, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. There are people out
Did
here who will go and on January 1st, they call it the polar bear plunge here in America.
Mhm.
All right.
In Finland they just call them swimmers.
Yeah. All right. Would have liked to see the games played out a bit longer. I think we covered this in the last
Mhm.
discussions, and I don't know. So Felix, unless you have something that we've missed or whatever.
no, I
No.
think
Okay.
that's
Okay. Thought that the Prussians were doomed from the beginning. Okay, so both sides had units available for combat that they did not have historically. Grouchy, for one, was present. And then the Prussians, I think it was at what Brunswick or somebody, I can't remember. Somebody was late to Auerstedt historically, and they were present on the battlefield. The Prussians did have a corps at the Battle of Grand Jena, which was completely uninvolved in the actual game that we played because they didn't call them into action until late in the battle, and by that time they were really too late to do anything. So I think the Prussians did not have enough force in the field, but I think part of that was a Prussian decision. Um, could they have been doomed from the beginning? Maybe. And again, remember here where I don't do historical things and where all my games have twists, I don't believe in games that are necessarily fair. Both teams are never going to be the same size. It's never going to be a 50-50 proposition. One side is probably going to have some advantage that the other side does not have. It is almost always going to be ahistorical or asymmetrical with me, and that's a martial game. And I don't know that the Prussians were doomed from the beginning. I think that's a little unfair. However, I can see where people take that opinion, but really, I left it all up to the two commanders to determine, first of all, what was the split of their forces going to be between the two battlefields, and then where did they want to place those forces on the battlefields? And then the intel that they got gets back to that cavalry game that Achilles mentioned. How well did you play the
Mhm.
cavalry game? Determined who had to set up first, and then who got the benefit of intel on the night before battle. So all of that was player determined. So I don't think the Prussians were doomed from the beginning, but don't expect me to ever hand you an even, a fair battle. I'm just not going to do it. That's just not what I do.
It, and I think this is also, of course, me massively shortening and simplifying what the player said. They might not have like said it exactly like that. I
Mhm.
think the word doomed was in there, but it was a bit more, let's say, carefully put. But I just thought it was an interesting point to just say what you just said, Marshall. Basically, just to give this feedback.
Mhm.
Next week we're doing the Alamo.
That would actually be interesting. The problem is, what do you get? One block that doesn't move? What are your orders? I continue to defend. What are your orders on the Mexican side? I continue to attack. Oh, we need to bring Sam Miller back to be Santa Anna for that.
Hmm.
All right, other positive feedback. Notice there's like, 5 here, 3 here. What the heck, man? Um, multiple people like the high number of players. Now, this was a surprise to me too, and I imagine that was a surprise to you, Felix. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes, I am forever the proponent of saying we need to make smaller but better games. Quality is more important than quantity, but turns out actually people love these giant games with many people and many players, and I can understand why, because this is really where Kriegsspiel shines, right? Where you have these
Hmm.
multiple levels of command, and you have like all the problems with control and communication that get bigger and more interesting. The bigger the game is, the more players there are.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. So I was surprised too. Like you, Felix, this experience taught me that I really want to drill down and concentrate on what I'm calling boutique Kriegspiel. And in the next month, starting now, in fact, I'm going to be trying to develop some sort of small batch, small brew, boutique style games where we have maybe 8 or 9 people involved, 4 players, 4 umpires, something like that kind of thing, just to see what that produces. Um, but yeah, I like the idea of big games too, and I like the idea of having at least 3 layers of command. And I find that deeply fascinating and interesting to be part of all that. But at the end of the day, um, I'm personally going to make a career decision here and move now towards smaller games rather than big games. But this was a pleasant surprise to see that. I hope more people will run more grand games. I certainly don't think this is going to be our last ever grand game, but I think grand games being just so hard to put together and pull off, it might be a while before we see another one. Like that, the pieces were on level below the unit that commands should be given to. Felix, do you want to go ahead and go into that one for us, please?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we had in the training games, and we were really trying to get get the players to do, was to give orders to their brigades, although they could see the battalions move around. And that we always said, okay, there might be exceptions where there is one specific battalion where you say, no, you need to protect the flank or whatever. So that's always a possibility. But in general, orders should be given to the brigade, which makes sense because players were division commanders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so that's also why this is here, because I thought that it's also interesting that this was mentioned by the players as something that they liked.
Good. And they like the pieces, and that's great work for Damon. I had the idea for these pieces, and I took it to Damon only to find out that Damon had the idea as well and had actually already created prototypes of the design. So that was cool. Great minds think alike. And I recommended a number of refinements, which he implemented, or I should say customizations, which he implemented. And I like the pieces too. I like that it looked like an actual battle line on a battlefield, as opposed to just a bunch of blocks. And trust me, nobody loves blocks more than me, but I really like the look and feel of these pieces. Okay, quotes to make the umpires feel warm and fussy. And I know um, Felix meant fuzzy, but fussy is different. But that's
Maybe
okay.
he meant fussy.
Yeah, maybe he did mean fussy. Fussy is like when a baby is crying and can't be pleased. Fuzzy is aw kind of thing.
Mm,
But
sounds about right, yeah.
that sounds about right. Um, so some quotes here. Very well executed, good resolution, good pace, felt fantastic, great fun, very well done. All right, that was to me, right? Right, Felix?
Yeah, that said Marshall colon. I just took that out.
Underline, 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 underline.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you go ahead and go over all of these, Felix. Just go ahead.
I mean, like, I don't think there's anything to discuss here. I mostly just put them in because this was also the PDF that I gave to the other umpires, and so that they could get some positive feedback after all the critique.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you did a fantastic job, Felix, on both of these events. Let's be honest, you did the majority of the work for this event. So I put
Thank
you in a
God.
situation, and yeah, you're the hero of the day. So it would be wrong for me to take all of the credit, but I'm going to anyway. But no, I think you did a great job, Felix, and everybody who helped to umpire did phenomenal. And with anything, there's always room for improvement. There are always things that we could have done differently or better. But at the end of the day, we made a number of very tough choices. We streamlined the number of players and pieces. And oh man, how many times did we go back and forth, Felix? And we made tough choices throughout. But in the end, I think we ended up with a game that hit that 85% mark, I think, overall. And I think that's just about as good as it gets. There's always going to be the critics and the people who complain, but by and large, I think this was a very good experience. I want to compliment in particular the announcers. I think the narration of the event was very good, and not because I was doing that job, but because I was joined by people who offered really, really good commentary for the battle. Before we wrap up, I'd like to go through some of the comments here, and I don't know if I can. Let me go to the top of the comments here. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of conversation. Let me change my window so that it shows up on OBS. Oh, it does show up. No, it doesn't. I want it to show up on the YouTube. You know what? I think no, I think no, we're good there. All right, so sorry guys while I figure out how to Discord. So we're going to stop streaming and then we're going to start streaming and we're going to stream this right here. Go live. There we go. All right. And I want to, I don't know if there's a way to pop this out or, yeah, here we are. Oh, well, that doesn't help much, but I think maybe I can't do anything with it. All right. I'm sorry, folks. It is what it is. But I just want to go through here and see if there's some comments that we want to highlight. Wow, you guys were talkative. Look at this. This can't be
I
right. Oh
don't think
no.
this
No,
is.
this isn't the whole thing. All right, this is like the whole history of coffee kegs and Kriegsspiel. We don't want that. All right. Today at about 9 a.m. Okay, here it is. All right, all right, all right. So Sheephead said he was made Blucher 10 minutes before the game. Okay, that's important because we did have a lot of shakeup prior to this. One of the things that I kind of mandated early on, and then it didn't quite work out, but I mandated early on that divisions would be handed out on the day of the game. That army commanders were going to be handpicked, which they were, and then corps commanders could be appointed, but division commanders would not be handed out until the morning of the event. There was so much pressure to get division
When did you
commanders
say that?
like early on in the planning
Okay, I
process.
don't remember that at all.
Yeah, again, it was early and it just didn't work out. And the moment I started to allow people to come into the server to create the buzz and get people plugged in, I think they just started kind of handing out division commands. So that was that. But the problem that we run into with these big games is that you have people who just no show. They're there and they're excited and they're enthusiastic, and then 6 a.m. or whatever hits, and boom, they're not there. And so now you have to hand the division or the corps in some cases off to someone else. That's what happened to poor Sheephead. And that has a negative impact on the planning and the event itself. So I've done a whole other podcast telling people, hey, show up to these games. If you sign up, it's a commitment, show up. I understand that life happens, but when I say life happens, it's like you need to come to work or you're going to lose your job. Or you've got to go to the hospital because you or someone you love is in the hospital. To me, those are acceptable excuses, not many others that I would accept. Unfortunately, this is a hobby, and again, we're all doing it for fun, so I can't punish people. I can't do anything about it. But I really want to strongly admonish people that if you sign up for an event, especially a big event like this, where there's a lot of planning and preparation going into it, show up. Oh my gosh, I want to strangle you when you don't show up. I understand, again, life happens, but I just kind of covered all of the excuses where I think it's okay to not make it. Otherwise, you need to be there. Let's see
You're
here.
dead.
Yeah,
you're, you're dead. Okay, maybe we can accept that excuse.
yeah. We'll think about it, right? We'll think about it. Let's see here. Are there any comments that you guys want to highlight here?
No, I just want to say regarding the point about people not showing up. I think it was pretty good in this game. We had in the lead up a few switches, and I guess the Prussians were hit pretty hard by that. But on the day, I think we had very little problems with people not showing up.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah. All right. So talking about things here. There are, I think Miles, who happens to be here, made a really astute comment. He said, "Don't forget that France had a huge liability in being under my command." You know, so there you have it. Um, there you go. Reformer pointing out that I'm scrolling way back because, of course, I am. Ironically, having a bit of flexibility in the roles was helpful in some regards. I joined very last minutes and was originally essentially not really even a player as 2IC for the Prussians. But when Sheephead had to leave about halfway through, then I was there to step in as Blucher number 3, so that was good. Well, I'm glad you're there, but giving Blucher, subscript 1, subscript 2, subscript 3 is not so good.
Actually, it's kind of historical because he was drunk most of the time anyways. He probably
Yeah.
fell off of his horse a couple of times. So having multiple Blukers actually kind of works out in a weird historical way.
You're right. And we have done that. I mean, I think you even mentioned this in some of your training scenarios where you're dead at the first shot, and
Yeah.
you replace the commander. But again, that's something that's planned. It's part of the scenario. In this case,
Hmm.
it's not part of the scenario. Uh, you know, uh, G-Host says France replaced about half of the Auerstedt division commanders, I believe. So yeah, so that's why I didn't want to assign divisions beforehand, because I wanted to make people show up. because I was afraid somebody would get a division and they would jealously hold that division and then they would just not show up. And then you have somebody thrown in at the last minute. What's the point of that? But that was me. So I still think, despite the hiccups, it worked out really, really well. And this was a pretty good event. Let me take a quick look here at the YouTube. Um, the Siberian Productions says the 3D map adds a lot to the feel of the game. Do you still do a top down screenshot for the updates? The answer is yes. It would be cool to do a perspective shot from the commander for the update. We do a top down based on the commander for the update. So the screenshot is centered on the commander and it only goes out to a certain range based on their view range, and it's reduced if anything blocks their view. If you're thinking of a command from the saddle perspective, we want to do that, and I think there have been some experiments in doing that. If you play, what is it, Waterloo or what Norvsoft devs computer games, they let you play from that perspective, and I think it's brilliant. It's absolutely awesome. I'm very sad that those games are no longer in production. Um, they did Gettysburg and they did Bull Run and then they did the Waterloo series. I think it was called Norbsoft Dev or whatever. Take Command, wasn't it called? Take Command, that series. Um,
Hmm.
a really cool way
James
to play it.
James does. James has done something like that on
Yeah,
some of
he
those
has.
Thursday games that he does, and those look just fantastic.
Yeah,
Anybody that's not anybody that can and isn't playing in James's games, yeah, you're doing it wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Go get there. Go try one of those because he runs great games.
Yes, he does. He's absolutely awesome. So he certainly surpassed me in terms of quality and dedication and everything across the board. So, and that's good. I expect. First of all, I'm not hard to surpass, and two, I expect it. So, to see that somebody successfully done that makes me very happy. So, and then Melchet says the games are being re-released. Are they? What do they call it when they update the graphics on them? What it's remastering them? Are they remastered?
Effing him up I think that's what
Right,
they call
right.
it. Effing him up. Effing him up.
And Melchett says yes, they're being remastered. So there you go. All right. Okay, I'm done talking. Felix, do you have anything that you want to say or add uh, for?
No, I think the one thing that I might still say once more is that there was a fantastic team of umpires, and although I did a lot of the organization, I couldn't have done it without them, and so that was really great, especially because there were also a few people that, or many of them, that I didn't work with before and that were fantastic, and so thanks to all of them. And I have to leave now because dinner's on the table. So have a nice day,
Well,
everyone, and bye bye.
well, I understand that. Achilles,
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen,
Auf
Felix.
Wiedersehen, Felix.
Any final comments from you, Achilles?
No, I would echo what Felix said. I think certainly from a player's perspective at Jena, the umpire that I dealt with did a great job, and it felt like the team itself did a great job from that perspective. And then from a commentator perspective, with you on the Auerstedt game, um, it looked like they were running things pretty well. I mean, there were,
Mhm.
obviously you pointed out a few things that, I'm sure the overwhelming nature of things kind of set things aside that could have been in there. But overall, yeah, I think they did a fantastic job. So,
Wonderful, wonderful. Anybody in the audience want to raise your hand and pop up and say anything for the good of the order? You just have to click the invite to speak or request to speak button. I don't know where that is, but no. All right, I'm not seeing anything, but want to give everybody a fair chance to find the button and figure out how to do it because I know someone like Miles is like, where is that button? How do you click it?
oh, he just raised his
There
hand.
he is. There, I told
Quick,
you.
mute
I
him.
told you.
Quick,
I
mute
told
him.
you. There he is. There he is. There you are, Mr. Miles. Now, of course,
You
your
know,
mic is
the
muted.
the
But
one guy we were hoping wasn't going to show up on game day. Napoleon, but there he was. You know,
Had to fight before. But
Can you hear me now?
there's some feedback though. Yeah.
I'm going to blame Marshall for that. And I just want to, thank you guys for putting on the game. I had a great time, and it's a spectacle. I wouldn't want to do them every month, but I do them once or twice a year, and it's kind of feels because why do you do it? Because it's just something you don't get to do that often, and really, really appreciative of all the effort you guys put into that, and the superlatives far outrank the things we can do better. And so I was, very grateful for the experience.
thank you.
Marshall, you seem to be the. Are you muted, Marshall? Because I can't hear anything you're saying.
I think your mic's on the fritz.
Messed up.
Mic off. Mic on.
Nope. Well, as Marshall was trying to say, coming out and play, I'm sure he would, and he certainly hopes that you enjoyed it, that it was a great experience for you, and that we see you many times more in the future. And on a personal note, I enjoyed having you as CIC, and you deserved to be the only member of the victorious Napoleon Club.
The only member to date. There'll be another.
The only number to date. That's right. So enjoy that mug while you can. Yeah, Marshall, you're just totally messed up, brother.
I think Marshall's just cursing, and the auto suppress thing is just bleeping him out.
That could very well be. All right. And I think Marshall's saying to everybody out there, thank you very much, and we're out of here.